The funeral arrangement weighed heavy in Iris Nakamura's arms. White lilies and deep purple irises arranged in cascading waves, the kind of tribute that spoke of profound loss and enduring love. She'd spent 3 hours on it that morning, her fingers working through stems and ribbon while her boss hovered, reminding her this was for the Castellano funeral, that everything had to be perfect, that the Castellano family was not the kind of client you disappointed. Now, standing on the pristine doorstep of what her GPS insisted was 1247 Lakeshore Drive, Iris felt the first prickle of unease crawl up her spine. The house was wrong. Not wrong in any way she could articulate. It was beautiful, elegant, a modern masterpiece of glass and stone overlooking Lake Michigan. But funerals happened at funeral homes, at churches, at cemeteries. Not at private residences that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. She checked her phone again. 1247 Lakeshore Drive. The address matched. But something in her gut screamed that she'd made a mistake, that she should turn around, go back to the shop, verify with her boss before... The door opened. The man who filled the doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and dark slacks that probably cost more than Iris made in a month. His black hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble like he hadn't slept, and his eyes, dark, intense, red-rimmed, fixed on the funeral arrangement in her arms, with an expression that made Iris's breath catch in her throat. "These are for my wife," he said, his voice rough and hollow. "How did you know?" Iris's mind went blank. Her wife. But this was supposed to be. The Castellano funeral was for Antonio Castellano, the patriarch who died of a heart attack at 73. Not... she started, then stopped, her arms beginning to shake under the weight of the flowers. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I'm looking for the Castellano residence, but this delivery is for... I'm Marco Castellano." He stepped forward, reaching for the arrangement with hands that trembled slightly. "And these are exactly what Elena would have wanted. White lilies, purple irises, her favorite." "How did you know?" Iris's heart hammered against her ribs. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. The funeral was supposed to be for his father, not his wife. She would have remembered if the order had been for a woman, would have remembered the name Elena Castellano. But as Marco lifted the arrangement from her arms, with a reverence that bordered on worship, she saw the tears tracking down his face, the way his fingers trembled as they touched the purple petals. "The irises," he whispered, more to himself than to her. She always said they reminded her of twilight, that liminal space between day and night, between what was and what could be. His eyes lifted to Iris's face, and the raw grief in them hit her, like a physical blow. "Who sent these? Who knew?" Iris fumbled for her phone, pulling up the order form with shaking hands. "The order says Antonio Castellano, 1247 Lakeshore Drive. It's supposed to be for a funeral today at..." "My father," Marco interrupted, his voice cracking. "The funeral is for my father. But Elena..." He pressed his eyes closed, his jaw clenching. "Elena died 6 days ago. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light downtown." When he opened his eyes again, they were devastated. "I haven't been able to... I couldn't choose flowers for her service. Couldn't make myself walk into a florist and pick out arrangements like I was ordering fucking groceries. So there are no flowers, no service scheduled, nothing but me and this empty house, and the knowledge that I'll never see her again." Iris felt her throat close. "I'm so sorry. I didn't... The delivery must have gotten mixed up. These were meant for your father's funeral, but I..." "No?" Marco's grip tightened on the arrangement, his knuckles white against the dark ribbon. "No, these are for Elena. They have to be. White lilies and purple irises, arranged exactly how she would have wanted them. This isn't coincidence. Someone knew. Someone sent these for her." He looked at Iris with such desperate hope that she felt something crack open in her chest. She knew she should correct him, should explain that this was a simple address error, that she'd been supposed to deliver to the funeral home 3 blocks away. But standing here, watching this man cradle flowers meant for his dead father, like they were a lifeline to his dead wife, Iris couldn't bring herself to shatter whatever comfort he'd found in the mistake. "The card," Marco said suddenly, his eyes dropping to the small envelope tucked into the arrangement. "What does the card say?" Iris's mind raced. The card would say something appropriate for a father's funeral. Condolences, memories, the kind of formal sentiment people wrote when they didn't know what else to say. It wouldn't mention Elena. It wouldn't be the sign from the universe Marco so clearly needed it to be. "I don't know," she heard herself say. "The cards are sealed. We don't read them." Marco pulled the envelope free with careful fingers, his hands still shaking. Iris watched him open it, watched his face as he read whatever sentiment had been meant for a grieving son about his father's death. She held her breath, waiting for the moment when he realized the truth, when the fragile hope in his eyes would shatter. But instead, his face crumpled. A sob tore from his throat, raw and broken, and he pressed the card against his chest like it was precious. "She knew," he whispered. Somehow, she knew. Iris stood frozen on the doorstep, her delivery bag hanging forgotten from her shoulder, watching a stranger fall apart over flowers that were never meant for him, over a card that said nothing about the woman he'd lost. She should leave, should make her excuses, go back to the shop, deliver the replacement arrangement to the actual funeral home where Antonio Castellano's service would begin in less than 2 hours. But Marco Castellano looked up at her with devastated eyes and said, "Thank you. For bringing these. For—" His voice broke. "For giving me something of her back, even if it's just flowers." And Iris, who had spent 26 years being careful, being responsible, following every rule and meeting every expectation, heard herself say, "You're welcome. I'm glad they brought you comfort." The lie felt enormous, impossible, but Marco's expression, the way some of the desperate grief eased from his features, made it feel like the most important truth she'd ever told. "I'm Iris," she added, because it seemed wrong to let him thank her, without even knowing her name. "Iris Nakamura, from Blumenthorn on Clark Street." "Marco!" He shifted the arrangement to one arm, extending his other hand. When Iris took it, his grip was warm, firm, grounding, despite the tears still tracking down his face. "Thank you, Iris, for this kindness, for—" He gestured helplessly at the flowers. "For her." Iris nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and extracted her hand from his. She should go. She needed to go. Her phone was already buzzing with texts from her boss, probably wondering where she was, why the delivery was taking so long. But as she turned to leave, Marco's voice stopped her. "Wait." He hesitated, the arrangement still cradled against his chest. "The funeral, my father's funeral, it starts at noon at St. Catherine's. Will you—" He swallowed hard. "Would you consider coming? I know that's strange. I know you don't know me, but you brought Elena's flowers, and I don't know if I can get through this alone." Iris stared at him. It was completely inappropriate. She was supposed to deliver flowers, not attend the funerals of strangers. Her boss would be furious if she disappeared for the afternoon. She had 3 more deliveries scheduled, had promised to help with the afternoon arrangements, had a million reasons to politely decline. "I'll be there," she heard herself say. Marco's eyes closed briefly, relief washing over his features. "Thank you, Thank you." Iris walked back to her delivery van in a daze, her mind spinning. She'd just lied to a grieving widower about funeral flowers that were never meant for his wife. She'd agreed to attend a funeral for a man she'd never met. She'd looked into Marco Castellano's devastated eyes and made a choice that went against every professional boundary she'd ever maintained. And as she sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel, she realized she didn't regret it. Not even a little bit. Her phone buzzed again. Her boss, Angela. Her texts growing increasingly frantic. "Where are you?" The Castellano funeral starts in an hour, and we still haven't delivered the main arrangement. Iris stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She could explain. Could say she'd gotten lost, that the GPS had sent her to the wrong address, that she was on her way to St. Catherine's right now with the flowers. But that would mean admitting the mistake. Would mean Marco discovering the truth. That the flowers he'd seen as a gift from Elena were just a delivery error. That the universe hadn't sent him a sign. That his wife was still just gone, with no comfort, no closure, no flowers. Delivered, Iris typed back. Client received them personally. On my way back to shop now. Another lie. She was collecting them like stones in her pockets, each one weighing her down, each one impossible to take back. She drove to St. Catherine's instead of returning to Bloom and Thorn, parking 3 blocks away and walking to the church in her sensible flats and work polo, a lily pollen stain on her sleeve and anxiety churning in her stomach. The funeral was already in progress when she slipped into a back pew, a full Catholic Mass. The church packed with people in expensive black, the casket at the altar draped with the American flag in honor of Antonio Castellano's service in Korea. Iris spotted Marco in the front row, his shoulders rigid, his head bowed. The flowers she'd delivered sat on a table near the altar, separate from the other arrangements, positioned with prominence that made her chest tight. He thought they were from Elena. He'd given them a place of honor at his father's funeral because he believed his dead wife had somehow sent them. The guilt nearly sent Iris running back out of the church, but she'd promised. She'd looked into Marco Castellano's grief-ravaged face and promised she'd be here. So she stayed, sitting in the back pew through readings and hymns, and a eulogy delivered by a man who spoke of Antonio Castellano's strength, his loyalty, his devotion to family. She watched Marco's shoulders shake during the Lord's Prayer, watched him accept condolences with practiced grace during the recessional, watched him carry his father's casket with 5 other men toward the waiting hearse. She should leave, should slip out before he noticed her, before this temporary madness could compound into something even more complicated. But as the crowd began to disperse toward cars for the cemetery procession, Marco's eyes found hers across the church. The relief that washed over his face, raw, grateful, desperate, rooted Iris to the spot. He made his way toward her, navigating through knots of mourners offering condolences, his jaw tight with the effort of maintaining composure. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in every line of his face, the way his eyes kept darting toward the flowers on the altar, like they were a lifeline. "You came," he said, his voice rough. I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would," Iris replied simply. "Thank you." Marco's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "For being here, for the flowers, for—" He shook his head. "I don't even know how to thank you. But having something of Elena here, having that connection, it's the only thing getting me through this." Iris felt the lies accumulating like debts she couldn't repay. But looking at Marco's face, seeing how much comfort he'd drawn from the accident of her wrong delivery, she couldn't bring herself to confess. Not here, not now, maybe not ever. "I should go," she said instead, gently extracting her hand. "You have the cemetery and the reception and—" "Come with me," Marco interrupted. "To the reception. It's at my father's house, just family and close friends. I know I'm asking too much. I know this is strange, but please, I need—" He swallowed hard. "I need someone there who knew Elena, even if you only knew her through the flowers she would have chosen." Every rational part of Iris's brain screamed that this was insane, that she needed to stop this before it spiraled further out of control. But she looked at Marco Castellano's devastated face and heard herself say yes. The Castellano family estate in Oak Park was exactly what Iris had expected, and nothing like it all at once. The house was massive, old money refined with modern updates, full of leather furniture and oil paintings, and the kind of casual wealth that came from generations of power. But it was the people that surprised her. Not the stereotypical mobster caricatures she'd half expected, but families, children running through the garden, elderly women in black clustering in the kitchen, men in suits speaking in low voices with genuine grief etched on their faces. Marco stayed at her side, introducing her to relatives with a simple, "This is Iris. She brought Elena's flowers." As if that explained everything. As if that made her presence at a private family gathering completely logical. No one questioned it. They simply nodded, thanked her for her kindness, and folded her into their mourning with the ease of people who understood that grief made family of strangers. Iris found herself in the kitchen with Marco's mother and aunts, helping arrange platters of food she hadn't prepared, listening to stories about Antonio Castellano's stubbornness, his terrible jokes, his devotion to his children and grandchildren. They spoke around Elena's absence like a missing tooth, present in every gap, every unfinished sentence, every moment when someone started to mention her before catching themselves. "She would have loved those flowers," Marco's mother said suddenly, her eyes finding Iris across the kitchen. She was a small woman with gray-streaked dark hair, and Marco's same intense eyes, red from crying. "The irises, especially. She had them in her wedding bouquet. Did Marco tell you?" Iris's throat closed. "No, he didn't mention that. Purple irises and white roses." A sad smile. "She said they represented hope and new beginnings. That girl always saw poetry in everything." Her voice cracked. 6 days. It's only been 6 days and I keep forgetting. Keep thinking I'll call her. Ask her advice about the funeral food or what flowers to choose for Antonio. Then I remember." Iris set down the serving spoon she'd been holding, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Both of your losses." "You knew her?" Marco's mother asked, hope brightening her features. "From where? I don't think I've seen you before." The lies were going to collapse. Iris could feel the house of cards she'd built swaying, ready to tumble. She opened her mouth, not knowing what she was going to say, how she could possibly explain. "From the hospital," Marco's voice came from the doorway. He crossed to stand beside Iris, his presence both steadying and terrifying. Iris was one of Elena's nurses after the accident. Before... He didn't finish the sentence. She was kind to Elena, to both of us, in those final hours. Iris's heart stopped. The lie was so much bigger than anything she'd told, so specific and verifiable, and completely insane. She should correct him, should tell the truth before this spiraled completely beyond her control. But Marco's mother was already moving toward her, pulling her into a tight embrace that smelled like expensive perfume and grief. "Thank you," she whispered against Iris's shoulder. "Thank you for being there. For helping her. For caring." Iris stood frozen, her arms eventually coming up to return the embrace, the weight of what she was doing settling like concrete in her chest. She was lying to grieving people. She was letting them believe she'd known Elena, had been there during her final moments, had provided comfort in their darkest hour. She was a terrible person. But when Marco's mother pulled back, her eyes shining with tears and gratitude, Iris couldn't find the words to shatter that comfort. Not when it was the only thing keeping these people standing. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Iris helped serve food, accepted condolences on behalf of people she'd never met, and tried not to drown in the mounting lies. Marco stayed close, his hand occasionally finding hers, his presence a constant anchor and reminder of the deception she'd tangled herself in. As the afternoon wore into evening and guests began to depart, Iris finally found a moment alone on the terrace overlooking the garden. She braced her hands on the stone railing, breathing in the cool October air, trying to figure out how to extract herself from this situation before it became completely untenable. "You're thinking about leaving." Iris turned to find Marco standing in the doorway, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened, exhaustion written in every line of his body. He looked at her with those intense dark eyes, and she felt exposed, seen in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. I should go, Iris said carefully. You have family here, and I shouldn't have stayed this long. Why did you? Marco moved closer, stopping a few feet away, giving her space, but clearly wanting to close the distance. Why? Did you come to the funeral? Stay for the reception? Let my mother cry on you, and my aunts feed you and my cousins thank you for kindness you don't owe us? Because I'm a coward, Iris thought. Because I looked at your face and couldn't bear to take away the comfort you'd found in a stupid delivery mistake. Because somewhere between your doorstep and this terrace, I stopped being able to separate what's real from what I'm pretending. Because you asked me to, she said instead, which was true, if incomplete. I know who you are, Marco said quietly. Iris's blood turned to ice. What? I called the hospital, after the funeral, when you were in the kitchen with my mother. I called the nursing station, where Elena died, asked if there was a nurse named Iris Nakamura. His expression was unreadable. There isn't. No one by that name on staff. No one who matches your description. The lies had collapsed. Iris felt the impact like a physical blow, her hands gripping the railing to keep herself upright. I can explain. You're the florist, Marco continued. Just the florist who delivered flowers to the wrong address this morning. The flowers weren't from Elena. They were just an order that got mixed up, delivered to me instead of to the funeral home where they belonged. Yes, Iris whispered, shame burning through her. I'm sorry. I should have told you immediately, should have corrected the mistake. But you looked so desperate, and the flowers made you happy, and I— Thank you, Marco interrupted. Iris's head snapped up. What? Thank you. Marco's voice was rough with emotion. For the lie, for letting me believe, even for a few hours, that Elena had sent me something, that she was still with me somehow. He moved closer, close enough that Iris could see the tears gathering in his eyes. I know the flowers were a mistake. I know the card said something generic about my father, probably from some business associate who felt obligated to send condolences. I know none of it was from her. Then why? Because it helped, Marco said simply. Having those flowers at the funeral, believing Elena was there with me in some way, it got me through the day. And you— His hand came up, gently cupping her face. You stayed. You came to the funeral of a stranger. You sat through the reception with my family. You let my mother cry on you, all to preserve a lie that brought me comfort. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How kind? Iris felt tears slip down her cheeks. I'm not kind. I'm a liar. I let you believe something that wasn't true. Let your family thank me for things I never did. You gave me what I needed when I needed it most, Marco interrupted. Even if it was built on a mistake and a series of small lies meant to protect me. His thumb brushed away her tears with devastating gentleness. You're either the kindest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. Definitely both, Iris said with a watery laugh. Marco's lips curved into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Why did you really do it, Iris? Why go along with the mistake? Why come to the funeral? Iris looked into his eyes, saw the genuine curiosity there, the need to understand. And she found herself telling him the truth, the complicated, messy truth beneath all the lies. Because when you opened that door this morning, you looked like my father did when my mother died. Like the world had ended and you were just going through the motions of still being alive. And when you saw those flowers, when you thought they were from Elena, for just a moment, you looked like you might survive this. She swallowed hard. I lost my mom to cancer when I was 16. Watched my dad try to hold it together. Watched him pretend he was okay when he was dying inside. And I kept thinking, if someone had given him even 5 minutes of believing she'd sent him something, of feeling like she was still with him somehow, he would have held on to that, used it to get through. So I gave that to you, even though it was wrong. Marco's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and Iris let herself be held by this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, could feel the way his breath shuddered with suppressed emotion. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said into her hair. "I'm sorry about Elena," Iris replied. "And your father, all of it." They stood like that for a long moment, two people bound together by grief and lies and the strange intimacy of shared loss. When Marco finally pulled back, his hands remained on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "Have dinner with me," he said. Iris blinked. "What?" "Dinner. Tomorrow, or next week, or whenever you're free. Let me take you to dinner." Marco's expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. "Not because you brought flowers, or because you lied to make me feel better, but because I want to know you. The real you. The woman who cries during deliveries and goes to funerals for strangers and somehow makes me feel like I might be able to breathe again." "Marco, I don't think—" "Don't think," he interrupted gently. "Just say yes. Let me buy you dinner. Let us start over, without the lies, without the grief. Just two people getting to know each other." Iris knew she should say no, should maintain the boundaries, extract herself from this situation before it became even more complicated. But she looked at Marco Castellano's hopeful face and remembered the way his hand had felt in hers, the way his presence had steadied her through an impossible afternoon. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Okay? Dinner?" Marco's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. "Tomorrow, 7 o'clock? I'll pick you up." "I should meet you there," Iris countered, some sense of self-preservation kicking in. "Text me the address." She gave him her number, watched him save it in his phone with careful attention, like it was something precious. When he looked up at her again, his expression had softened into something tender. "Thank you, Iris, for everything today, for the lies and the truth and everything in between." The restaurant Marco chose was intimate, elegant, tucked into a quiet neighborhood that felt removed from the rest of the city. Iris arrived 10 minutes early, her hands shaking as she checked her reflection in the restaurant's window. She'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a simple navy dress that made her feel both put together and like herself. Marco was already there, waiting at a corner table, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made Iris's heart stutter in her chest. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy, and when he smiled at her, Iris felt the last of her reservations begin to crumble. "You came," he said, echoing his words from the funeral. "I said I would," Iris replied, echoing her response. They talked through dinner, real conversation, without the weight of grief and lies pressing down on them. Marco told her about Elena, the stories flowing more easily now, the grief still present but no longer suffocating. He talked about how they'd met in college, how she'd been studying art history, and he'd been trying to escape his family's expectations by majoring in business, how she'd seen through him immediately and loved him anyway. "She knew," Marco said, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "About my family, what we do, what I do. She knew before we got married, and she chose me anyway." He looked up at Iris, his eyes dark and honest. "I need you to know that too. What I am. What my family is. Before this goes any further." Iris set down her wineglass carefully. "I know the name Castellano. I'm not naive." "Knowing the name and knowing what it means are different things," Marco said. "My family has been in Chicago for 4 generations. My great-grandfather came from Sicily in 1920 and built an empire. Some of it legitimate, much of it less so. We own restaurants, construction companies, waste management. We also control territories, run books, handle problems that other people can't solve through legal channels." His jaw tightened. "I've tried to move us toward legitimate business, to honor Elena's wish that our children wouldn't grow up in the same world I did. But I'm still my father's son, still the next head of this family. And that means I'm still dangerous, still connected to violence, still living in a world that took my wife from me. The drunk driver, Iris said quietly. Wasn't drunk, Marco corrected, his voice flat. Was hired by a rival family to send a message. Elena was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or the right place, depending on how you look at it. They meant to hit me, got her instead. Iris felt cold wash through her. You're telling me Elena was murdered? I'm telling you that being close to me is dangerous, Marco said, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm telling you that before you agree to see me again, before this becomes something more than dinner, you need to understand what you'd be stepping into. My world isn't safe, it isn't simple, and the people I love become targets. He was giving her an out. Iris could see it in his face, the way he'd deliberately laid out every reason she should walk away. He was being honest, brutally so, giving her the truth he and Elena had built their marriage on. Iris should take it, should stand up from this table, thank him for dinner, and go back to her safe, quiet life, delivering flowers and going home to her cat. But she thought about the way Marco had cradled those flowers like they were precious. The way he'd held her on the terrace while she cried. The way he looked at her now, like she was real and solid and important. Like he'd already started falling and was terrified she wouldn't follow. I'm not Elena, Iris said carefully. I can't be her, and I won't try to replace her. I know, Marco said. I don't want you to be her. I want you to be you, Iris, who delivers flowers and tells lies to comfort strangers, and somehow makes me feel like I might survive this. Your world terrifies me, Iris continued. The violence, the danger, the idea that someone might hurt me to hurt you, all of it scares me more than I can express. Then walk away, Marco said, though his voice was rough with emotion. I'll pay for dinner, I'll thank you for everything you've done, and I'll let you go. No hard feelings, no pressure, no— But I'm not going to, Iris interrupted, her heart hammering, because somehow, in the space of one impossible day, you've become important to me. Because when I think about not seeing you again, about going back to my life and pretending I never met you, that terrifies me more than anything else. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. So I'm staying. I'm choosing this, choosing you, with full knowledge of what it means. And I'm terrified, but I'm staying anyway. Marco's hand tightened on hers, his eyes shining with emotion. You're either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. Definitely both, Iris said, echoing their conversation from the terrace. You said that already. Marco's laugh was surprised, genuine, the sound of it warming something in Iris's chest. He stood, moving around the table to her side, pulling her to her feet and into his arms in one smooth motion. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe, he said against her hair. I'm going to protect you the way I couldn't protect Elena. I'm going to make sure you never regret this choice. You can't promise that, Iris said, even as she leaned into him. You don't know what's going to happen. No, Marco agreed, but I can promise I'll be there. Whatever happens, wherever this goes, I'll be right there with you, no matter what. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Iris felt herself let go, of her fear, of her careful control, of all the reasons this shouldn't work. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, choosing risk over safety, choosing connection over isolation, choosing this dangerous, impossible man and whatever came with him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. The flowers, he said quietly. The ones you delivered. I kept them. They're in my bedroom, next to a photo of Elena. I know they weren't really from her, but somehow they still feel like a gift, like the universe's way of bringing you to my door when I needed you most. Iris's throat tightened. I should have delivered them to the right address, should have followed the order correctly. I'm glad you didn't, Marco said fiercely. I'm glad for the mistake, for the wrong address, for every circumstance that brought you to me. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "You saved me, Iris. Maybe not in the way you think, maybe not in any way that makes sense, but you did. And I'm not letting that go. I'm not letting you go." Iris looked into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected back. The terror and the hope, the certainty and the doubt, the absolute knowledge that this was either the best decision or the worst one she'd ever make, and there was no way to know which until they were already in too deep to turn back. "Then don't," she whispered. "Don't let go, no matter what comes next." "Never," Marco promised against her lips. "I'm holding on, and I'm not letting go, not for anything." 3 months later, Iris would stand in Marco's living room, surrounded by men in expensive suits, listening to plans for retaliation against the family that had killed Elena, and she would understand exactly what she'd chosen. 6 months later, she would move into Marco's house with its bulletproof windows and armed guards, and she would make peace with the fact that her life would never be normal again. A year later, she would say yes when Marco proposed with his grandmother's ring, choosing to bind herself permanently to this dangerous, impossible man and his dangerous, complicated world. But in that moment, standing in a quiet restaurant with Marco's arms around her and his lips against hers, Iris simply chose to fall. To trust that whatever came next, they would face it together. To believe that sometimes the wrong address leads you exactly where you need to be. The flowers had been a mistake, but everything that came after, that was a choice. And Iris chose Marco, chose this life, chose to believe that love could bloom even in the darkest soil, even when planted by accident, even when everyone said it shouldn't survive. She chose to stay. And in choosing, she found exactly what she'd been missing in her careful, controlled life: passion, purpose, and a love fierce enough to make the danger worth it.